There's already the talk of, if Georgia gets past Clemson 1-0, are they running the table and going 12-0? I think that there's a lot of overlooking Florida, given the fact that Georgia has kind of dominated the Gators over the last couple of seasons, with the exception of this past year. And I think a lot of Georgia fans are writing that off to, well, they had the quarterback, they had the passing game. Georgia's defense was really banged up in that game. It was the first time that the Bulldogs were playing without Richard LeCounte, out without Jordan Davis. They obviously had the quarterback struggles, and if you look at the way that the two teams finished the season, I think Georgia fans, and maybe even college football fans in general, would say that Georgia finished stronger with JT Daniels. And if those two teams met with JT Daniels as the quarterback rather than Stetson Bennett and Dwan Mathis, it may be a different story, and you may see Georgia playing in Atlanta against the Crimson Tide. So, obviously Georgia fans are not going to be happy with the way that this season went against Florida, but I think that there's definitely still some excitement and optimism around where the program stands, and especially comparing it to Florida.
Yeah, Florida is a quality program. Obviously, Dan Mullen knows what he's doing, but they're still recruiting at a different level than Georgia. They're still not at that. And there is, I think, and you as a recruiting guy, a guy that works at a place in particular that is all about recruiting, can you speak to, there are levels to this, as they say. Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama are recruiting at a certain level. LSU jumps in there from time to time. Clemson jumps in there from time to time, but basically that's it. And then Florida's doing a nice job of bringing in top 8 classes, 10 classes, 12 classes in that Michigan, Notre Dame area, but that's showing on the field that that's not getting you there. That's producing 10-3 records, 11-2 records, which is good, but it's not going to compete for a national championship. And despite Georgia's recent disappointments, they did come within that close of winning a national championship 4 years ago, and they did come that close to, again, the next year against the consensus number one, having a 2-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter against Alabama, and nobody else is doing that.
Yeah, and I think you look at Georgia, they are certainly competing for national championships, whether they're actually in that game or in the talk and in the hunt, to be in the college football playoff. I think, each of the last couple seasons with this year, aside, Georgia has been in the talk. They back in 2017, they were in the playoffs. They lost the national championship game by that much, like you said. 2018, 2019, Georgia was in a win and get in situation in that SEC championship game. Whereas Florida has had some difficulties and hasn't been in those kind of situations. Even this past year, there was still the talk of, well, if Florida won that SEC championship, are they in the playoffs? I think that they probably would have been, given the fact that they beat a very, very good. They would have beaten a very, very good Alabama team, but they weren't 100% in. You bring up the recruiting rankings. I pulled it up here. Florida is going to finish 13th this cycle. They were, after 2 classes in a row that they were in the top 10, finished 9th and 9th in 2020 and 2019. Whereas, like we were talking about with Georgia, they finished 1 and 2 those 2 years respectively. I know other ranking sites had Georgia finishing number 1 in 2019 when 247 had them finishing 2nd, and it was across the board in 2020 as well as in 2018 that Georgia was the number 1 ranked recruiting class. So I think, like you said, Georgia has kind of been in that upper tier of recruiting programs. They've just got to finish on the field. And I will say one thing that Florida has done better than Georgia is go out and get those big name transfers. You look at, they brought in Brenton Cox from Georgia. He was a 5-star. They've got a couple of 5-star guys this year as well. Georgia's going to have to do that this season. It's an area where they haven't necessarily had that need to go out and get a 5-star talent in the transfer portal. They need that this year. They need to go out and get 1 or 2 defensive backs, especially corners that can, play on the outside. They've got some young guys, very talented young guys Keely Ringo is someone that comes to mind. He was the number one cornerback in the country in this past recruiting class in 2020. He's a guy that didn't get to play this past season. He tore his labrum in high school, had surgery on that, and wasn't able to play, but was dressing out, going through warm-ups at the end of the season. So he was able to go through some practice, get some reps there. He's a guy that's going to have to step up. But, Georgia certainly is going to be looking at the transfer portal and hoping that they can hit on some guys like Florida has in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, not to make excuses for Georgia. One of these games was under Mark Richt and the other two against with Kirby Smart. But, when you guys finally slay the dragon and beat Alabama, boy, I can't imagine the partying in Athens that particular night. But 2012, 17, 18, you're talking about a team that couldn't get to a national championship game in two of those three situations just because they were knocking heads with Alabama in the SEC title game. But if you just looked at the talent on the field and the results of the game and how close, excruciatingly close those games were, you knew that you were watching the second best team in the country. Maybe the best team in the country. They just didn't have the breaks or didn't make the right calls from a coaching standpoint to get it done.
And if you go look at the team talent composite from this past season, Georgia was number one there ahead of Alabama. So, from a talent perspective, Georgia is there. They just need to play on the field with Alabama. And you bring up that, dream of, what Athens may look like after, a win over Alabama. My only concern there would be, you look at that 2017 season and the fact that they got them in the national championship game, that would have been, fantastic for Georgia because they wouldn't have had to turn around and go play another game. In all likelihood, you're not going to see that again. You may, but in all likelihood, you're going to see these two teams matching up in the SEC championship game. And so my concern for Georgia would be once you get over that mountain, you've still got two more games that you got to climb and grind out a win there in the playoffs. The hay isn't in the barn once you beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. They're going to have to beat them and maybe beat Alabama again in the playoffs, but they're definitely going to have to beat two talented teams in the playoffs if they want to win that national championship.
Yeah, the only consideration there that because I'm totally on board with just the sheer mental exhaustion beyond the physical that it does in the big letdown there is at least you got the 3+ weeks to recover, refocus, get ready for Oklahoma, Ohio State, whoever it is, in a first-round playoff matchup.
Absolutely. You're correct there. But, the thing that comes to mind for me was you look at this past year's Ohio State team and how much energy and emphasis went into the rematch with Clemson. They didn't have it there with Alabama. And obviously there was a talent gap there too. But, they didn't show up to play against Alabama like they did Clemson. And, I think that could be the case for Georgia. They put so much energy and effort into beating an Alabama team that they may not have that energy and effort to, repeat the kind of performance and go out and win, 2 playoff games. So it's a hurdle that Georgia's got to get past. And it's one that, they've got a great chance to get past this season. But, there's obviously a lot of football to be played to get there. And so I'm sure we'll be talking plenty of times between now and that potential game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium come December. So, if that's a mountain that Georgia has to climb, then I think Georgia fans will be very happy to have that opportunity once again.
And if between Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia, they all meet expectations in their other games, so they're basically undefeated in all the other games. Georgia playing Clemson, I think, is a positive. I don't think it's going to be a negative. I don't think the playoff selection committee is going to, if Georgia goes out there and goes 11-1 and they lose to Clemson by a field goal in a great game, that's going to be like a non-loss. It's going to be viewed by the committee as, okay, Clemson's undefeated or they're 11-1 as well. They're all 1-2-3 or 1-2-4 or whatever they are within the top 4 or 5 in the country. And it's just going to be treated as such, unless it's a butt kicking, then it's going to be viewed completely different and hurt them down the road. But as long as they stay close, I know they don't want to hear that about any kind of, I'm not considering that a moral victory, but it just in regards to it playing toward the college football playoff. I think it's all a positive for Clemson and Georgia.
No, you're right. Things could absolutely get very interesting for, let's say, Georgia if they were to lose a very close game with Clemson in that opener, and then go up against a 12-0 Alabama team in the SEC championship game. Do both those teams get in? If does a 2-loss team get in that scenario? It would be probably the best argument for a 2-loss team in the playoff era. So, but like we said, there's plenty of football to happen between now and then, and I'm looking forward to breaking it down with you throughout the season.